Aston Martin's Serif Honda problem is not actually a horsepower deficit, but a low-frequency vibration so violent that Fernando Alonso had to physically let go of the steering wheel mid-corner during the Chinese Grand Prix. Everyone in the paddock has been obsessing over rumored power gaps and dyno charts, yet the true crisis threatening the team's entire 2026 campaign is a mechanical resonance that makes the car nearly undrivable at the limit. This isn't just about being slow on the straights. It is about a fundamental flaw that compromises driver safety and forces engineers to detune the engine just to keep the chassis from shaking itself apart. The popular narrative suggests that once Honda finds the missing horsepower, Aston Martin will instantly rocket up the order, but that assumption completely ignores how this vibration issue has already contaminated every single aspect of their car design. So why would Adrian Newey, the greatest designer in Formula One history, commit his future to a project where the very foundation of the car is currently compromised by an engine characteristic he cannot simply tune away? That question hangs over Silverstone right now because the answer determines whether this partnership survives or collapses under its own weight. When we talk about Aston Martin having a serious Honda problem, we are talking about a situation where the power unit supplier admitted defeat before the season even properly began. Shintaro Orihara stated publicly that when they started running in Barcelona, they realized their performance was definitely poor compared to other manufacturers. That is not a PR deflection. That is a works partner acknowledging on the record that their product is fundamentally uncompetitive in the current regulatory era. But here is where the story gets complicated for anyone trying to pin this solely on Honda. Even if you isolate the engine issues entirely, Aston Martin has been measured at around 3.5 seconds off the fastest qualifying pace at various points in 2026. That massive gap means the power unit problems do not fully explain the car's lack of competitiveness. Chassis and correlation issues are equally implicated, creating a dual front war that no amount of engine development can solve on its own. The vibration crisis has been severe enough to threaten basic operational viability. Around the Australian Grand Prix, the team was reportedly down to its last 2 working hybrid batteries with absolutely no spares available. Imagine being a race engineer knowing that a single failure means retirement, not because of bad luck, but because your supply chain has been exhausted by chronic reliability failures. This is what happens when a manufacturer returns to Formula One as a full works partner without sufficient validation mileage. The AMR26 is powered by a new in-house Honda power unit for the first time in this generation of regulations, and the teething pains have been catastrophic. ESPN and Motorsport.com have both explicitly framed the season as a crisis, citing driver safety concerns as the most alarming individual element. When a 2-time world champion like Alonso cannot trust the car through a corner because the steering feedback is physically painful, you are past the point of normal development struggles. You are in survival mode. Yet despite all this, there is a twist in the data that nobody seems able to agree on, and it might change how we view the entire deficit. The specific incident in Shanghai was not a momentary glitch, but a systemic failure that exposed the raw danger of this power unit integration. Telemetry data from that Chinese Grand Prix weekend showed the vibration frequency spiking precisely when Alonso reached peak lateral load, creating a resonance window that made mechanical grip impossible to maintain. He didn't choose to release the wheel. His hands were forced off by physics. This is the terrifying reality of the AMR26's current state, where the Honda ICE transmits severe low-frequency oscillations through the entire monocoque structure rather than isolating them within the engine mounts. Engineers have been scrambling to identify a root cause since preseason testing, yet the problem persists into the heart of the 2026 season. Safety compromised, grip vanished, trust broken. What makes this particularly damaging for Aston Martin is that they cannot simply turn down the engine to stop the shaking without sacrificing the already limited performance they have. The vibration isn't just a comfort issue, it is directly linked to the hybrid system's energy deployment patterns. When the MGUK harvests or deploys at specific torque levels, the crankshaft harmonics interact with the chassis natural frequency in a way that no simulation predicted. This is why Honda has stated it is still working to identify the root cause months after the car first turned a wheel. They are chasing a ghost in the machine while their partner team suffers the consequences on track. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to drive a car that fights your inputs at 5G? Now consider doing it knowing the component causing that fight might also be destroying the battery cells mounted inches behind your spine. This brings us back to those unverified horsepower numbers that dominate every forum debate. Paddock whispers cite an energy recovery deficit of roughly 100 kW, which translates to about 136 horsepower against top competitors. Other sources suggest a thermal engine deficit of only 60 horsepower versus Red Bull, while separate estimates claim an overall gap of 80 to 100 horsepower compared to Mercedes. F1 Natix frames the number as 90 horsepower in its own coverage. These figures contradict each other by as much as 75 horsepower, revealing that nobody outside Honda's factory actually knows the true output. But here is the narrative twist hiding in plain sight. The exact magnitude of the power deficit matters far less than the fact that the vibration prevents the team from consistently accessing whatever power does exist. You can have all the theoretical horsepower in the world, but if the engine shakes the car apart when you deploy it, that power is effectively useless. So let's consolidate what we know about the physical toll this takes on the package. The team's inventory crisis around Australia proved that reliability isn't just about finishing races, it is about having enough components to even start them. Being down to 2 functional hybrid batteries with 0 spares means every lap in practice becomes a calculated risk rather than a data-gathering opportunity. Development stalls, testing halts. When you cannot run the car freely because you might destroy irreplaceable hardware, you fall into a spiral where the vibration problem prevents the mileage needed to fix the vibration problem. It is a cruel engineering paradox that no amount of budget can instantly solve. Adrian Newey has had to change the whole car concept because the Honda engine simply did not fit as originally packaged, forcing architectural compromises that compound the performance loss. The serious Honda problem is therefore not just an engine issue. It is a cascading failure that has reshaped the AMR 26's identity from a potential contender into a survival project, and understanding that distinction is critical before we examine how the team plans to escape this trap. Zoom out for a second and picture trying to assemble a high-performance racing car while the engine supplier is still rewriting the installation manual every other week. That is essentially what Aston Martin's design office has been enduring throughout 2026, because the Honda power unit's real-world characteristics diverge so drastically from the original CAD data that Adrian Newey was forced to redesign the entire chassis architecture mid-cycle. This wasn't a minor packaging tweak or a revised cooling duct. It was a fundamental rethinking of how the car comes together, driven entirely by an engine that didn't fit as planned. When your lead designer has to scrap the foundational concept because the hardware won't physically integrate without compromising aerodynamic efficiency, you are no longer developing a race car. You are performing emergency surgery on a patient that is still running on the treadmill. The vibration issue we discussed earlier isn't just shaking Alonso's hands, it is shaking the very blueprint of the AMR 26 to pieces. This architectural upheaval explains why the team's stated goal for the second half of 2026 has quietly shifted from fighting for podiums to simply securing reliable midfield points. That is a massive downgrade in ambition, and it directly reflects the compounding nature of these technical failures. Motorsport Week and Motorbiscuit reported that Honda's revised power unit met internal targets ahead of its Zandvoort debut. But notice the careful language there. Internal targets are not competitive benchmarks. Hitting your own development milestones means nothing if those milestones were set too low to begin with. Reports suggest potential gains from this update range from roughly 20 to 50 horsepower depending on the outlet, yet no single figure has been independently verified by multiple sources. We are once again navigating a fog of unconfirmed estimates, where optimism is manufactured in press releases while reality is measured in tenth lost per lap. Time freezes, hope fades, reality bites. The gap between hitting internal targets and closing the actual performance delta to Mercedes or Red Bull remains vast. And that distinction is exactly why Aston Martin finds itself near the back of the Constructors' Championship, despite having one of the most celebrated designers in history leading the charge. Newey himself acknowledged on August 3rd that serious work on the current car didn't begin until April 2025, a late start that left zero margin for error when the Honda integration went sideways. He described the team as being in early research stages for the AMR 27, working through big architectural decisions like engine positioning within the wheelbase and chassis placement. Those are not the words of a man fine-tuning a contender. They are the words of someone laying new foundations because the old ones cracked under pressure. So where does that leave the 2026 campaign right now? The answer lies in accepting that this season is effectively a write-off, serving primarily as expensive validation testing for next year's regulations. The confirmed 2027 technical direction includes a 58-4-2 split favoring internal combustion over electric power, a 5% increase in fuel flow, and adjustments to energy storage and deployment. On the chassis side, the front floor bib leading edge moves forward by roughly 300 mm, enabling a lower front-of-car ride height philosophy. These are concrete regulatory changes, not rumors, and they represent the reset button Aston Martin desperately needs. Newey noted that the biggest change involves what's often called the T-tray at the front of the floor, a geometric shift that could fundamentally alter how the car generates downforce. If Honda can solve its vibration and power issues before then, the AMR 27 might actually arrive as the contender the AMR 26 was supposed to be. But until that happens, the serious Honda problem remains the defining constraint of this era, and remembering how this all started with Alonso letting go of the steering wheel in China reminds us that no amount of future promise can erase present danger. Go back to that opening line about Alonso releasing the steering wheel in Shanghai, because that singular moment of physical danger is exactly what forced Adrian Newey to abandon the original AMR 26 concept entirely. The vibration wasn't just a driver complaint, it was a structural incompatibility that made the initial packaging unworkable, proving that blaming Honda alone ignores the deeper chassis correlation issues plaguing this team. Even when engineers isolated the engine problems during testing, the car remained roughly 3.5 seconds off the fastest qualifying pace, a deficit far too large to be explained by power unit shortcomings alone. This is where the narrative shifts from a simple supplier failure to a complex integration crisis that has consumed Aston Martin's entire 2026 development cycle. Newey confirmed he had to change the whole car because the Honda engine didn't fit as originally planned, meaning every aerodynamic surface and suspension geometry was compromised by an installation that never should have been signed off. Design failed, correlation broke, foundations cracked. The race explicitly rejected the blame, the engine narrative, arguing chassis issues are just as significant a factor as the widely publicized power unit problems. This nuance matters because it reframes the serious Honda problem as a shared organizational failure rather than a vendor dispute. When your wind tunnel data doesn't match track behavior, and your engine installation forces constant redesigns, you lose the ability to develop either system effectively. You end up chasing two ghosts simultaneously, which is precisely why the team has spent large parts of the season near the back of the Constructors' Championship. The 3.5-second gap isn't just missing horsepower, it's missing downforce, missing mechanical grip, and missing the confidence to push development in any single direction. Newey's admission that serious work didn't begin until April 2025 reveals how late the team realized the extent of these integration flaws, leaving them no runway to correct course before the season started. Yet despite this bleak picture, there is a human element that defies the technical pessimism.